I think it's about that time again. I think the hunger is about to overtake me. I think the hunt is on.
What are we hunting for? Is it people this time? I'm ready. What?
Dude, we promised not to talk about that in public.
We're not recording yet. It's probably time.
Hang on. All right. Let me click record here.
Yeah. Okay. Start now.
Hey, did you ever? It's time to buy a new domain.
Ooh, what you gonna get?
I don't know.
Like something. You got a new. Wait, you're not doing a new podcast, are you?
No, not.
Okay.
I hope not. God, I hope not. It's time for a new domain. I won't get into why. I just need another domain in my life.
We all, sometimes you just need a new domain.
That's, like, it's just nice to have a list of them. I've got like 6 of them that just renew every year for like $6 to $8 a piece. And I'm like, Perfect. I'll probably never use those, but they're cool.
You never know when you're going to need one. You never know when it's going to show up.
That's right.
I had content.town for years.
Right. That's an amazing domain.
One day I was like, hey, what we should do we should have a website for our podcast. And you were like, well, we'd have to go find a domain. And I was like, hey, what about content.town? You were like, that is exactly the kind of town I would like to live in, the one filled with content. Thus, a podcast was born.
As always, the most desirable and least attainable trait of a new domain is brevity. You want a short domain and you can never get one. So that's the angle.
So this is a former CNET guy thing, because when I worked at Future, we literally there was no you all kind of had a whole I don't know. I don't want to call it like a fetishization, but it was kind of a fetishization of very short domain names.
Mm-hmm.
And in the magazine world, we were just going for the stupidest possible names when we were buying domains. So we were looking for goofy, not necessarily brief.
God, what was it that CNET owned a domain like a .com that was insanely short that I think they used to serve all of their images from? I cannot remember what it was.
It was like a.com or something like that.
Something like that.
A single letter one that somebody had bought early on.
It was ridiculous. So my strategy here, I decided I'm not going to get a .org or anything super cool and classic. I think if I want a short domain, I'm going to have to go for the new top level domains.
Oh, you're going to get a .pizza?
Those will be the least bought up. Well, so I pulled up a list here. I pulled up a reverse list of TLDs by launch date. So here I've got what came out in the last year. I might be able to roll back years before that, but I think more than a year old is pointless, right?
Is .weed a domain name yet? I assume it is.
I should probably cross-reference. Actually, I do have the... Okay, .weed is not.
Oh, .green is the cannabis-related top-level domain.
Was that real?
Yes, that is a real thing.
That is it describes it as environmentally focused, but that's a type of environmental.
It's true.
I suppose. Okay.
I just bought willsmith.fun a couple of weeks ago. It's my Blue Sky handle.
That's pretty good.
I also bought willsmith.actor. I can switch between them interchangeably for lulz.
Yeah. I have one that I am thinking about deploying on Blue Sky eventually, but not yet.
BradShoemaker.green.
It is all of 8 letters. It is start to finish. It is an 8-letter domain name.
Okay, that's pretty good.
All right, here's what came out in the last year.
What you got?
In reverse order. Not 6 weeks ago, .watches and .channel.
Ooh, .channel is pretty good.
It's okay.
A little long.
I like it. I like a TLD to not be more than 3 characters if possible.
Wow. So .za, not .pizza.
Yes. .dad.
.dad's pretty good.
.esque as in Esquire, ESQ.
Okay.
Or esque as in ESQUE.
Yeah.
Maybe. That would actually not be bad.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
.foo.
I like a .foo.
Yeah.
It's a placeholder.
I might give .foo a look and see what I can find. .nexus. .prof.
Oh, that's pretty good.
As in professor.
That's very Star Trek .nexus.
Okay. This might actually be the reason that we're even talking about this. Now we come to the real decision point.
Okay.
.zip and .mov.
Wait, is prof.prof like prof?
Yeah,
like professor?
Yeah, no, like professor, yes.
Okay. Or professional, I guess.
So we come to zip and mov.
Okay. .zip is a crime and shouldn't be allowed to exist.
No, that's why I bring that up, is that those are probably the least popular TLDs to be introduced in a very long time.
I'm going to suggest that there probably is a lot of there are a lot of people that are buying those .zip
Actually,
domains.
you're right. Actually, if anything, scammers have probably bought up as many of those as they can get their hands on. So maybe I'll just pass those by.
I could get will.art for $12,999.
That's maybe a little out of impulse purchase territory.
The renewal is only $60 a year, though, so it's a pretty good deal once you get through that first year.
It's just an investment that you make in yourself.
Yeah, I feel like I'd have to be better at art first. What else? What else you got? It's hard to know what I should do here, what I should recommend here without knowing what this domain is. I mean, I know what this domain is for, but the listeners don't, so I don't want to What about brad.tax? Could you get that? That's a $46 a year.
Is that available?
Well, will.tax is available.
Huh. What's your domain search of choice?
I'm a Hover. I use Hover for searches. I could get Will Surf for $29 a year.
.surf?
Yeah. I could get Will Organic for $85. That's a bit out of my range. Will.vin.
Wait, this cannot be real.
What?
If I say this out loud, okay, brad.tax is taken.
Oh, boo.
Brad.tech is $719.
That's too much.
That's too much. You know what? I'm just going to have to buy this before this episode posts. Brad.fun is $5.
Brad.fun? You got Brad.fun?
It says, unless there's something about Hover that I'm not.
Nope.
It's literally, it says sale $4.99.
And you should buy that.
Is .fun new?
.fun is relatively new. I think you're fun enough to be Brad.fun, if we're being real.
Clicked through to cart. I have gone all the way through to the point where I can register this domain. It's $5.17.
This is bunk, because will.fun is available, but because will is the future tense of the be verb, it's $379 a year instead of $5. Mm-hmm. I don't feel good about it. I feel a little bit taken here for a ride.
Okay, well now that I've said, as always, now that I've said out loud a domain, shoe.fun is $1,400.
Well, I mean, that makes more sense. I could get will.tattoo for $5. I
could get shoe.computer.
Oh, that's pretty good. Computer's too long though.
Shoe.systems. Shoe.industry. Is there really an industries?
Shoe.industries is pretty good.
That's pretty long, man. Shoe.band.actor. .art is $1,300.
Oh man, will.move is $719. I don't know. Will.actor was the most expensive one I bought in a Will Smith.actor was the most expensive one I bought in a long time. It was like $30, I think.
Ooh, shoe.tax is available.
Shoe.tax is pretty good.
All right, enough of this. As I said, ooh.
Yeah. Oh no, that's an expensive sound.
Shoe.fm for $90.
Oh, that's good.
Because the registration per year is not going to be that much.
Well, you have to look. It tells you.
This is okay. We're going to stop this. I'm sure this is highly self-indulgent for the listeners. The
will.singles, $33.99.
The thing I was starting to say earlier, now that I've said out loud a domain that I want to purchase on content, as always happens, we have to end this so I can go get it right now.
Hey, Brad, if I get will.phd, does that mean I'm a doctorate? Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Good morning, Brad.
Good morning.
Early afternoon, Brad.
You want to pretend this is still morning when we are post-meridian?
I got up. We're pre-meridian still because it's daylight savings time, sir.
Oh, fair.
I live on solar noon.
Technically.
Not calendar noon.
Technically.
We spoke this morning before I had made coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got up and I muddled my way into the kitchen and I turned on the kettle and I ground 22 grams of coffee and poured it into a small French press and then filled that with 300 grams of near boiling water and let it sit for 4 minutes and poured it into a cup and drank it and saw God.
As you do every day.
As I do every day. Yeah.
Every day. Do you still drink coffee every day? I think you're okay. We're talking about coffee here just to get it out of the way.
This is a coffee episode. We've tried to do this for a long time for the record. So let's see. I'm going to put some disclaimers up front. If you drink coffee and you enjoy it, you will learn something interesting today. If you do not care about coffee, this is a great episode for you to skip. You're probably good.
Well, I don't know. I mean, but as we will see, the quality of coffee is highly variable depending on about 8,000 different factors. So even people who think they don't care about coffee, maybe they just haven't had the right coffee for them yet.
I would say so some people don't like coffee because they're sensitive to bitter and sour, right?
Right. Yes.
Bitter and sour, bitter especially is like good coffee should have a little bit of bitterness, shouldn't be super sour for the most part. That means you've done a bad job or made your coffee's done maybe a not great job. But yeah, some people are more sensitive to that. And like people who have a lot of taste buds generally less likely to like coffee or they put a lot of stuff in it, which is fine. But yeah, we're going to talk about coffee. I've cared about coffee a lot for a really long time. I am not an expert by any way, shape, or form, but I have talked to a lot of experts over the years, and I've done a lot of reading, and I've read all the books, and I can brew a pretty decent cup of coffee at this point, I think.
I mean, if you're using a scale every day, that puts you at a higher tier of production, I think, than a lot of people.
I mean, it's just about measuring. It's just the easier way to measure. Like, I don't have a 22 gram scoop, right? But yeah, we're going to talk about coffee. We're going to talk about how it's made, how it's produced, the whole thing, like from picking coffee cherries off of bushes in the equatorial regions of the world to drying them and processing them so they're ready to be roasted, to roasting, to blending, to brewing, and all the other stuff. We're going to talk about Brad's favorite diner cups.
Mm-hmm.
They're on the list down here. There's a lot to it, but the place I want to start, I didn't put this at the beginning of the notes, but I should have. There's kind of not a wrong way to make coffee, right? Like, if the way you like coffee is the way that's the right way to make coffee for you. Now, there are ways that are unwise. Like, you can buy really expensive beans and then brew them in a way that they taste like shitty Folgers, and like, that's a personal choice. I'm not going to judge you for that. That's if you want to, that's just wasting money. That's fine. If you want to do it, I'm not going to complain.
That's like the buying a 21-year scotch and putting it in Coke.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of equivalent.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Coffee's interesting. It's funny. It's interesting you bring up scotch because scotch, like distilled liquors, a lot of beers also as well, like hops. There's plants that have interesting chemical makeup that produce a lot of flavorful compounds when they're processed, however you process them. For hops, it's drying and then I think boiling. For scotch, it's making the mash and then distilling that out, and the flavors of the malt and the fermentation and all that stuff come through the distillation process.
Malting the barley. I don't know if malting is the term. You are producing malted barley, but I don't know if the process is malting or if it's like roasting or something. But
there's a malting step in there. I went on a distillery tour once, but it was for bourbon. I think that I vaguely remember a malting step.
If you're doing Isla, you're throwing like bog peat in there somewhere.
Yeah, dirt. It's booze with dirt in it. Great. But the upshot is you get a lot of wine is the same thing. You get a lot of interesting flavor compounds that your nose can detect. That the human nose is an incredibly sensitive instrument. You can pick out a lot of different flavors and a lot of different complexity. And just to be clear, we talked about this when we talked to Adam Rogers about his book Proof a few years ago, but there's been science about this. Like at Davis, they did a study where they took 10 people or 12 people or something that had no experience wine tasting, and they taught them to recognize flavors and complexity in these beverages. Coffee works a lot the same way.
Yeah. Did we talk about super tasters on that episode?
I don't think super tasters matter a little bit less for liquor because liquor is mostly a smell. And super tasters about the density of taste buds on your tongue.
I'm just gonna let that one pass by without comment. Okay. There's plenty of taste there too.
No, I know, but it's not, you're not getting the 5 or 6, depending on how you count them, the sweet, salty, sour, bitter. You get 1 or 2 of those, not like all at once, like you do in something more complicated.
Yes.
So coffee starts with beans, right?
Or cherries. I like you mentioned that earlier, but when I came across the phrase coffee cherries in this notes document, it threw me for a loop.
Well, so the bean is the seed inside of a fruit. Like the coffee bean that you're used to seeing, the thing that you get out of your tub or you see in the wall at Starbucks if you buy ground coffee, is the seed from inside of a cherry. The cherries are about 1.5 inches to 2 inches. Like they vary in size based on the species and the variety, but they grow as like a red cherry looking thing on the side of the thing. And then those coffee's hard to grow. So that fruit is then processed to remove the fruit and the shell and all the stuff that comes with it from the bean, at which point it's a green bean. And then that green bean is shipped in a bag, usually like a big 50-pound bag, to one of the coffee importation ports around the world. Houston is a big one. I think Portland is one of the big ones. Boston is another one. And there it's distributed to, like in the US, it's distributed to roasters within the country. In more industrial coffee productions, like if you're talking about Nestle or one of the big industrial coffee producers, they often do the roasting. You usually want to do the roasting as close to the consumer as you can, because green beans store for a really long time, years. And roasted coffee has a shelf life measured in, depending on who you ask, months to days or weeks. So the faster, like there's a degradation in flavor over time, the longer the ground coffee, the roasted coffee sits. And then that's further accelerated once you grind the coffee. So if you buy ground coffee from the store, you're going to get less flavorful, less good tasting coffee than if you grind it the morning before you pour the water in.
Everything you're saying is throwing off my plan to start buying in extreme bulk, which I was going to ask you about later, but we'll get there.
I was going to tell you that was a bad idea later, but I'll tell you it's a bad idea now if you want.
Okay. Real quick before we move on, because I doubt we'll talk about the fruit again. Does the coffee fruit have any uses or applications? Is it edible? Do people cook with it?
So we're going to talk about the fruit actually, because the fruit's like the whole thing's really interesting. The fruit is the fruit's called cascara. Like if you see a cascara, like oftentimes you'll go to a coffee shop and you'll see a cascara beverage on the menu, and that'll be something that's made with the coffee cherry, the ripe coffee cherry, and it's a very sweet, it's a delicious thing. I don't know if you can actually eat the fruit unprocessed. I don't know about that. I've never encountered that. So like one of the things people ask when they're asking about coffee is what's the difference between the cheap coffee, your Nestle, Folgers, whatever, your grocery store coffee that comes in the big plastic tubs, and then the stuff that comes in little bags at your fancy local roaster. And it starts with the growing. There's two main varietals, cultivars of coffee, Arabica and Robusta. Arabica is grown. They're both grown in hot, wet climates. The Arabica is a little more fiddly and a little more susceptible to disease. It requires a little bit less rain and a little bit lower temperatures. The Robusta grows hotter and wetter, so you can grow in places where there's monsoons. A lot of Robusta is grown in Vietnam, and that's a relatively recent. I mean, they've been growing coffee in Vietnam for a long time, but the growth of commercial Robusta farming in Vietnam is relatively new, and the Arabica production there is also increasing.
Real quick, as somebody who knows next to nothing about agriculture, is cultivar, is that like the product of selective breeding? Is that like a strain essentially?
Yeah. So varietal is something that evolved naturally, and a cultivar is something that we have selectively bred to produce in the coffee world, at least. I don't know if that's in the outside world as well.
I believe I have seen the term in other.
It's used differently in different places from what I understand, but that is my general understanding. Is cultivar is human directed evolution, right?
Okay.
So Arabicas are generally better coffees. The Robustas generally are used for darker roast and used in cheaper coffees and instant coffee and stuff like that. There are exceptions. There are some really tasty Robustas from like Indonesia and stuff like that. But the thing about coffee growing is it's fiddly. It's slight changes in elevation or climate, amount of rain, temperature, all of that can have an enormous impact on the crop on any given year. So, you can have a farmer in Colombia, and Colombia is very mountainous, right? So you can have a farmer in Colombia with fields at 3 different elevations that are 100 meters different from each other, right? And they'll produce wildly different tasting coffees, which is like within a 2-mile radius of each other. It's one of the things that there's a coffee convention that the Specialty Coffee Association of America puts on. And one of the things I went to at one of those was a grower who'd brought his coffee, and he had the same person roast it. Like he was working with a roastery that he knew from the US, and they roasted the coffee. They prepared the coffee the same way, basically. and you got to taste the 3 different coffees from 3 of his fields that were like, one was really light and acidy and had a lot of blueberry flavor, and like the other one was just like a bog standard ass coffee, and like it was a shocking demonstration, really. So Arabicas taste better. They have more complexity of flavor typically. Robustas are a little oilier, a little darker. They're easier to grow. Generally, Nestle and the big coffee producers, and just to be clear, Nestle's a shit company that does awful things, both to customers, to the people who are growing the coffee. They exploit the hell out of every step along the way and should be avoided, in my opinion. But
Nestle's the one that wanted to start controlling water rights.
Nestle is the one that convinced people in the global south that they should use formula instead of breast milk for their children, even in areas where there was not reliable access to water. So you had babies dying of dysentery. Nestle sucks. Nestle's really fucking bad. And that means that, and they've also, like, the espresso pods and all the stuff that they make fall in the same category. Nestle does a lot of Robusta production in Vietnam. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The upshot of this is that the entire coffee production for the world is one of the first industries that was impacted by climate change. That's why the price of coffee has gone up, is because global production, especially of high-end Arabicas, has gone down because the fields have a spin-up time measured in years. Yikes. So you can't, if your facing of the mountain changes the amount of rain it gets, then your production is going to go down, right? Which means that you then have to migrate your production someplace in a different area of where you are, which involves cutting down trees where there's climate impacts for that. There's all sorts of other stuff that has to happen. And it's like they were feeling the change in production as long as 10 or 12 years ago. Obviously a lot of the stuff that Nestle's done in Vietnam and other places is a result of that. I also don't want to make people think that there's only 2 cultivars that are Arabica and Robusta. There's a massive amount of variation inside those 2 varieties from the different cultivars. There's also a bunch of different varieties that are in much lower production. Those are just the 2 popular ones. Robusta is also generally disease resistant, so it's a little bit easier. Your fancy third wave coffee shops, generally like Arabicas. They're the preferred.
I think third wave coffee shop was right after coffee cherry in the list of phrases that I was like, huh.
Okay, so third wave coffee. First wave coffee is when you just go, everything's just coffee, right? Like you go into a store and you order a coffee and it's like, okay, I got your coffee, and then the woman pulls it out of the bun, and you get the waitress at the diner pours it out of the bun, and you have
truck stop coffee.
It's coffee. Ass coffee. Second wave started in the 70s with Peet's. Actually, Peet's was the first kind of specialty brewer in the United States. They did they specialized in a darker roast, and they inspired Seattle Brewing Company and Starbucks and all the other places. It's kind of, there's 2 things. One is that you were maybe more aware of where your coffee came from. It's when you started seeing people are advertising Colombian coffee or Brazilian coffee or African coffee. And also the general rise in availability of espresso drinks in the United States for U.S. people.
Can I ask, I assume we're probably going to be talking about Arabica mostly in this episode, but since we're talking about... kind
of, yeah. It's like there was a stigma for a long time about Robustas, but they're kind of on the rise.
Can I, just to cover our bases for the very cheapest end of things?
Yeah.
What is instant coffee made of? Like
coffee.
Is it just coffee? There's not some chemical process there, or like crystals? I get like Folgers crystals, I guess is what I'm asking about. Like,
yeah. So I think instant coffee is brewed coffee that they then dehydrate. And so you have a solid, it's basically solid version of the stuff that's dissolved and floating around in the water, in the hot water.
Solute.
Yeah.
I'd to skip ahead a little bit. I have been dabbling with cold brew coffee, and that's definitely been making me refresh my memory on solutions and suspensions and saturation points and stuff like that.
Well, so the instant coffee is an interesting place because it's typically where good flavor goes to die. The exception is that you can get, I think Kona Girl, which is a Hawaiian brand, makes a really good instant coffee. I learned about it because it's what they serve on the space station.
Oh.
And we had it when we went to Johnson Space Center with Tested and tasted a bunch of space food. And I was like, this is friggin' awesome coffee. How are you making good coffee that's instant? And they were like, I think I wasn't supposed to tell anybody, but anyway, don't tell the NASA people.
Wave your hands around and go science.
Yeah, exactly. And then third wave coffee is when people started caring about individual like producers, right? Like the characteristics of individual beans, trying to brew to get specific flavors rather than a general coffee flavor, or trying to roast to get specific flavors rather than a general idealized coffee flavor, et cetera, et cetera. Also, third wave usually indicates that there's some sort of a component that involves showmanship in production of the coffee.
Sure, I could see it.
Bit. So like in San Francisco, your almost all of your non-Starbucks or Pete's kind of chain coffee shops are going to be third wave shops at this point, probably. So yeah, that's it. That's beans. There's a lot of coffee that's farmed that's not economically sustainable for the people working in farms, despite the fact that the end product is a really high dollar luxury cash crop. So you want to buy ethically sourced coffee is my advice if you're concerned about that.
I think coffee is like the category that made me aware of the term fair trade. I believe. Yeah.
And that all that means is that everyone along the path is getting paid a fair living wage, right? Like the producers, the people working at the production farms, the people doing the processing, the people doing the harvesting, the people doing the roasting, everybody gets enough. And it costs more because those people got to get paid. People got to eat. There's a lot on the non-fair trade side. There's a lot of graft and exploitation. And I don't want to say it's not slave labor isn't that, but there's a lot of like really borderline indentured servitude, migrant farming type stuff happening in certain parts of the world. The harvesting is generally done by hand for high quality coffee. Yeah. The high quality stuff is harvested by hand. You have to pick the beans to make sure that they're the cherries to make sure they're the right ripeness. So that involves labor. You can machine harvest, but then there's a lot of waste because the unripe or overripe cherries are sorted out in the processing rather than, multiple paths through the fields to get all the fruit. Processing is really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that happens in processing as well. So the traditional way that coffee is processed is you pick the cherries, you lay them out under the sun, usually under some sort of like clear cover, like clear plastic or something. And then you let them dry out for a month or two. You run them through a huller, which knocks off the dried fruit at that point and leaves behind just the green bean, which is literally looks like a coffee bean, but it's usually kind of bumpy and green and it looks matte. It almost looks like it has a matte coat on, which sometimes is polished off, sometimes it's just left on, depending on the processor. And it takes time.
A little plumper than a roast bean, maybe.
No, they're almost exactly the same size, so they don't really shrink much when you roast them. But it takes a long time. There's a process that was introduced a couple decades ago that accelerated the production in places that typically had not produced good coffee. So a lot of Vietnam produced kind of under par coffee because it was too wet for the drying to work properly, and you'd end up with a lot of fermented beans or beans would get ruined in the drying process. So they have a wet method now that uses machinery and some special solutions in water to basically remove the cherry from the seed before it's dried. It cuts the time from the harvest to the roaster down to like a couple of days versus a couple of months. So there's a lot less storage, which means it's a lot less expensive. It also involves a lot of machinery, which gives them pressure over the producers, which is because it's the only way to get their coffee out to market, which, convenient.
Very convenient. Yes. I always wonder about like what are the available parameters for industrial sorting that like we're talking about here, like weight and size are the obvious ones, or anything else that they're able to, when you're talking about underripe, overripe, like the good ones, like how you're, and then also there's also an error margin there, right? Of like maybe the sorting is not actually that good.
Yeah. So the sorting's tricky because they like industrially they'll float in the wet process. They float the bad beans and the good beans sink, or maybe it's the other way around. I can't remember, but they do size sorting. Usually at the end, there's a human sort where they look for like insect holes and rotten beans and stuff like that. Because the green beans do still have a fair amount of water content, which means that they can ferment, and you don't want fermented green beans in your roast. It's
maybe you don't.
I'm pretty sure. Anyway, the wet method for processing is generally considered to produce inferior results. It's one of the ways that they make Robusta taste more like a good Arabica coffee. And then after that's done, those processed beans are bagged up. They put in those big 50-pound sacks and shipped by boat generally to ports around the world. And the green beans last a long time. Like you can buy green beans, let them sit for a really long time. The clock starts ticking when you roast them.
This is not really a problem, but I mean, like you're also from the South, so maybe you experience this as well. Every time you say green beans, I think of something extremely different than what we're actually talking about here.
Yeah, it's look, you don't put any pork. I mean, I guess you could put pork fat in these, but I would not probably. So the roasting is when you transform the flavor of the bean by cooking it. There's a couple of different stages. There's a drying stage at the beginning. Then there's this browning, which is where the Maillard reaction happens. The Maillard reaction basically fuses fats and it's what brown. When you put a piece of meat in a pan or on a grill, it's what makes the outside of the meat brown. It caramelizes sugars and it breaks down proteins and a bunch of other things happen. The upshot is the Maillard reaction develops a lot of flavors that are detectable by human palate.
Is it that same reaction on like literally everything you would pan, roast, or grill, like vegetables as well, or are there different processes going on depending on the food?
Generally speaking, if you put it on fire and it turns brown, it's Maillard.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the end, after the browning phase, between the browning phase and the development roast, there's a crack, and that crack is stuff inside the cellulose structure. It's like popcorn. Stuff inside the cellulose structure is increasing pressure, is boiling. It cracks the dried cellulose structure, and it makes a noticeable sound. You hear it. It's like crack, 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 crack inside the roaster. That first crack indicates that you're starting to develop flavors. And this is the point that like roasting, just to be clear, really hard. Like it requires some specialized equipment. It requires a lot of expertise. If you over or undershoot, you'll blow an entire batch of beans, which depending on the size of your roaster can be a pound or, 2 50-pound bags, right? It's high stakes.
Yeah, I would point out real quick, I'm sure you noticed the trend. Everybody took up new hobbies once the pandemic started. It seemed like people doing home coffee roasting became like a legit thing.
Yeah, well, so we did a coffee roasting video at Tested years ago. You can do it in a popcorn popper. Like you can do it on a burner out in your backyard. You don't want to do it inside the house because it makes a lot of smoke. But you can do it on a grill burner with a whirly popcorn popper. I've done that a couple of times, and it works. It works reasonably well.
Did you get what you would consider drinkable coffee out of it?
I drank the coffee. It was not like it. So I bought, I think 5 pounds worth of beans from Sweet Maria's, which is the place that is good to start buying green beans if you want to learn how to roast your own coffee. They're based in Oakland, and the results were fine, better than grocery store coffee, worse than anything I could buy from a good place.
Okay, that's fair. That's actually for a first attempt. That's pretty admirable.
First attempt, and using like not a coffee roaster. If you're using a real coffee roaster and like anything else, it's going to require a lot of time and experimentation, and you're going to make a bunch of bad stuff before you make anything good. But then once you it's the kind of hobby that requires a notebook with your settings and your times.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Real quick, when you described the first crack in the roasting process, it jogged a memory somewhere in my head. Do people sell first crack batches, or is there some like consumer facing application of that term? Because I feel like I've heard first crack in fancy upscale coffee somewhere.
So cracks indicate you're not looking at the roasted coffee while it's going for the most part. Generally, there's a sampling spoon where you can pull out a little bit and see what it looks like at any given moment, but you don't see the whole thing. Typically because they're closed and they're hooked up to ventilation systems that blast the smoke out of wherever you're standing, so you don't have to smell a bunch of smoke all the time. The first crack is the indicator that you're at a light roast stage.
I see.
And you want to keep, depending on whether you're looking for a light, medium, or dark, or super dark, you're going to go. A light or medium is probably before the second crack. The second crack is when the oils start to escape the inside of the bean. Because coffee beans have a fair amount of fat in them, and those oils will be trapped inside the beans between the first crack and the second crack, and after the second crack, they start to have ways to seep out.
So if anybody's out there selling a first crack blend or whatever, it's just a
they're just using terminology to market and saying it's a light roast.
Fancier way to say, hey, it's a light roast.
Yeah, there's a lot of hey man, here we're going to use some cool words to sell some coffee in the biz. But the development stage can go for a long time, and this is all of these things. Like the drying is something you want to happen kind of gradually and slowly, and then once the coffee reaches a water content inside the bean that you want to get it through that browning phase quickly so that you can get to the development phase, because the development phase is where the flavors happen. There's the early light roast typically are more acidic. They have fruitier flavors because the compounds that create those fruit like the citrusy and fruit flavors break down under the higher heat of the later stages. And light roast beans are typically dry looking. Flavors can be anything like citrus, vanilla, blueberries. It's typically not chocolatey stuff. That's usually a darker roast flavor. Although I have had light roasts that taste chocolatey. Those people are wizards. I don't know how that works. It's hard to get great results with light roast coffee if you haven't practiced a bunch and aren't spending a little bit of time dialing in the brews when you get a new bag of coffee, if you're changing the type of coffee that you brew every day. Medium roast, kind of the default American roast. It's if you go to a diner and ask for a cup of coffee, it's going to be a medium roast coffee. It's going to be a medium brown color, non-oily surface, and it tastes like what you probably think of as coffee. Dark roast or oilier and more bitter, sometimes even bittersweet. Like if you have something that you're like, man, I should put some cream in this, that's often a dark roast. Less acid in the dark coffees because the acid tends to react with the rest of the bean during the higher heat stages of the and be neutralized during the higher heat stages of the roast. And generally speaking, the longer you roast the coffee, the more the unique aspects of the coffee's flavor go away. So like every time the heat goes up, you're vaporizing more compounds and reducing them to something that's more standard. So if you have like a poorly produced Vietnamese, I apologize for continuing to pick on Vietnam, but it's the classic example of, hey, we're industrially producing kind of shitty coffee and then doing what we can to make it taste good. Often you buy Vietnamese coffee and then you dark roast it and it tastes like any other dark roasted coffee. If you buy like a really nice Colombian or like an Ethiopian Arabica and then dark roast it, you're just flushing money down the toilet. So, because you're buying expensive coffee and then you're making it taste like cheap coffee.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's a Scotch analogy again. Although I need to defend myself really quick. I don't know who actually drinks Scotch and Coke. Is that even a thing? That's just the first mixer that came to my mind. I don't think people do that.
I assure you that somebody drinks Scotch and Coke. Anyway, that's it for the roast. Like at that point, you put them in a bag and you sell them to people, or you grind them and sell them to people. Espresso is basically like espresso is a more violent process for brewing because you're pushing steam through the ground up beans at 9 atmospheres of pressure.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's what an espresso machine does. An espresso machine boils water, makes high pressure steam in a boiler, and then forces that steam through the beans to extract the oils and all the compounds. It never occurred to me that it's a pressurized process. Although now that I think about it, being in a coffee shop and hearing that hiss, that makes more sense. Well, that's why it's a much more complicated process. It's a lot more fiddly. Having to deal with boilers and stuff we'll talk about espresso machines in a minute. But anyway.
So I had written down espresso bean here because I was kind of doing some online coffee shopping earlier, and it made me wonder, is there anything special about espresso beans? Like,
it's how they're roasted. So you roast them differently because they are going to have a more like there is a more aggressive extraction of the stuff that makes coffee taste like coffee in an espresso roast.
I see.
Is there in an espresso when you make espresso? So you roast them accordingly so that because you're going to get all of that flavor out.
Is there any reason you can't just make coffee with espresso beans?
Oh, you absolutely can. Some people really like that. There's so again, this is like if you're buying single origin espresso, which is typically pretty expensive and a specialty item from a specialty shop, I wouldn't, just because you're not going to get what you want out of it because it's not roasted. Like you're going to get half of what the roaster is intending for you to get out of it if you're just pouring water over it, right? Hot water over it. If you're doing cold brew or something like that, where it's more immersed and there's more full extraction, you might get what you're looking for. I don't know. It never hurts to try. Like I've occasionally bought Sweet Tooth espresso from Ritual and brewed that, and it's a mixed bag. It's not. I've had good cups and bad cups. I find it's better to buy coffee designed roasted for brewing.
Sure. My other question, real quick. Sorry, at the end of the beans section here, but I think the answer is just don't. Is long-term storage. Like, let's say you're buying 5 pounds at a time. I put it in the fridge or the freezer, or no, vacuum seal it. But I think your answer is don't buy in bulk.
Well, so the answer to storage is get a vacuum, get a container that is airtight. You can get a fancy one from the coffee. Like Fellow makes a fancy one with a squishy in lid that you can push the lid all the way down and release the air, and it's very pretty and well designed. You can also just buy, I was going to say at Bed Bath & Beyond, but you can buy a stainless steel canister with a silicone gasket around the lid that clamps down, and that works just as well. Like you just want an airtight container. You don't want to put it in the freezer or the fridge because condensation is bad for the beans. So when you take them in and out, water forms on the outside of the beans, and that is not what you want. That's the recommendation I've always gotten. I know people are going to have feelings about this. I'm sorry if I offended you.
Don't worry, we'll bring up microwaving coffee later, and they'll forget all about it.
Look, I've been known to occasionally chuck a cup of coffee in the microwave to warm it up.
Is it a big deal? Is it actually a thing?
It's one of those things like, would I rather waste the coffee and not drink it? I feel bad about wasting. Like the interesting thing about this whole process of learning this stuff is that as I met cultivars, people who are farmers in at the conventions and stuff, it gave me a real appreciation for the amount of work that goes into every single cup of coffee. And I tend to not waste anything if I can. Like I clean out the grinder. So I get all the beans through and the whole thing. So yeah, I'll microwave it rather than waste a half a cup of coffee if I didn't drink it before it got cold.
Sure.
Is it the best thing to do? No. Is it better than wasting it? I think so. It's a personal choice. Okay, so we've grown, we've processed, we've grown, we've harvested, we've processed, we've shipped, we've roasted. It's time to grind. If you're buying Folgers, you can buy fancy coffee that's pre-ground. Don't buy fancy coffee that's pre-ground. If you're going to do that, just get your upscale Folgers and call it a day. The grinder is the single best way to make your coffee better. Having a decent burr grinder versus buying pre-ground or using one of those blade grinders will give you a better experience more than buying any amount of gear. More than if you put a nicely ground coffee into a Mr. Coffee drip maker, you're going to have a better experience.
Have you done straight up side by sides, or I assume you at least have enough experience to characterize the difference? Is it just a flavor thing? Yeah,
it's just a flavor thing. You get more consistent. The burr grind, the blade grinders don't. So the burr grinders smash the cellulose structures and get a pretty even mush of the pieces. The blade grinders are uneven, so you can have big pieces that are still whole. Basically, that there's no way for the oil and stuff inside the cellulose to escape. And you want that stuff to come out because that's what makes the coffee taste good, right?
That makes sense. That's actually a very straightforward and evident explanation of why there's a difference.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you can use a blade grinder, and if you pick it up and shake it while it's blade grinding, you can do a pretty good job with it. When I've been at people's houses and that's all they have, I hold it closed and hit the button and pulse it and shake it so it's constantly being agitated in there. Because the thing you don't want is to have a lot of dust on one end of the scale and a lot of big chunks on the other. And the benefit of the burr grinder is in order for the coffee to get from the top to the bottom, it has to be a certain size to pass through the burrs. And so you get an even distribution of particulate sizes. If you grind the coffee in the morning or even the night before, put it in the automatic maker, you'll have a better experience. Even for like you can, and just to be clear, you don't need to buy a $500 burr grinder if you're not making espresso at home or Turkish coffee or something that requires a very fine grind. Coffee Geek years ago did a fantastic thing where they took $500, $600 grinders designed for espresso machines. They took cheap burr grinders and they took just blade grinders, and they made espresso with a $50 Mr. Coffee espresso machine, which is basically an unbelievably cheap, not high enough pressure. I think it didn't even have a real boiler, but I can't remember. Like fake espresso machine. And Mark over at Coffee Geek pulled some pretty remarkable shots with the $500 grinder and the $50 espresso machine. Right.
Okay. All right.
But like I said, if you're just brewing, you can get a $50 Cuisinart burr grinder and you'll get really good results. They don't last forever. I've had 3 of them over the years, but they're fine for brewed coffee.
The Cuisinart, you mean, doesn't last forever? Not
the Cuisinart. The Cuisinart will conk out after my parents have gone through 3 of them in the last 15 years.
I see. We have an OXO that has lasted quite a bit.
Yeah,
it was about $100, but we've had it for 5 or 6 years and it's still going strong.
$100 OXO, $100. You can get a Baratza Encore for $100. Those are both really good, very competent brewers, grinders for brewed coffee. Whether you're talking about a pour over or a drip maker or Chemex or French press or whatever. And then the other thing you want to get is like a $20 scale that gives you half a gram-ish precision. That will help you measure your beans and your water. So you can actually get, because there's a bunch of different things that go into how your coffee tastes. The amount of time the water spends in the grounds, the fineness of the grind, the amount of water the ratio of grounds to water, all of that. Having a scale is the place to start because it lets you know how many beans you have and how much water you have and get that ratio right. That's where stuff begins.
Sure. All right. Real quick before we move on, I'm going to submit myself for your approval.
Okay.
Let's say you have a pretty decent burr grinder, but your practice is to, let's say, grind the coffee the night before.
That's okay.
And load up the machine and let it sit out. Really? I thought
it would be better to do it in the morning, but if there's a lot of good reasons to not run the grinder in the morning.
Yes.
Like you may have a small house, you have people who might be sleeping, you want to have coffee before they're awake.
A partner who gets up very early to go to work.
Yeah.
And would like to just get up and press a button.
Yeah, that's totally exciting.
Okay.
I don't have any beef with that.
I expected to hear it's like, might as well just buy pre-ground.
No. Like, look, you're talking about pre-ground coffee can sometimes be weeks and months old, right? And you're talking about volatile flavors that disappear in days, hours, in some cases. 12, like, get the extra sleep, man. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Cool.
I said this at the top of the show. There's not really a wrong way to make coffee. Everybody, when the SEA people did a survey on this years ago about what people like and what they grew up with, like the overlap, there's usually a direct connection between what you grew up with. If you grew up with a Mr. Coffee and Folgers, you're going to like light roasts that are pour overs these days, right? If you grew up with a percolator, if you grew up with a French press in a French press house, you're going to like a French press. You're going to like an immersion method that lets the ground sit in the water for a little bit. The only exception is percolators, which make horrible coffee for bad people and no one should ever use.
Can you define a percolator?
A percolator was a thing that they invented in the 50s so you could make more coffee with less beans. And basically it boils water in the bottom and it pushes it up a straw. The boiled water goes up a straw and then comes out in the basket. And it just keeps getting stronger and stronger and stronger the more it runs. So it makes, and the coffee is uniformly over extracted. So it's really, really bitter and awful. You have to put a whole shitload of sugar and cream in it to make it even anything approaching drinkable. And like you literally might as well just drink, just drink a Coke or something, man. It's not worth it.
There it is. I knew it was coming. I knew there had to be one technique or roast or some aspect of something in here that would be unacceptable, and there it is.
My dad's parents used percolators, and it was every time I went to visit them, it was living hell. This was before I even really liked coffee. I just knew that I shouldn't drink that shit because it would be a one-way ticket to the bathroom. Anyway, the only thing I do say is if you're going to spend money on expensive beans from a good roaster, don't learn to brew the coffee in a way that lets you taste what the beans are. Like if you're buying a pound bag of Starbucks dark brew, go nuts, put in whatever you want. Doesn't matter. If you're buying light roast from a fancy roaster, then, get a decent pour over setup or something so you can kind of see what's going on. And also I'm going to talk about a handful of different ways to brew coffee here. There are literally as many ways to brew coffee as there are cultures in the world. Everybody has their own thing. Everybody does stuff a little bit differently. From the range of techniques between Turkish coffee, which is just that you grind it so fine and the sediment, like the entire bean stays in your cup. You just drink it because it's kind of an emulsion of water and bean. Have you never had Turkish coffee?
No, that sounds wild.
It's really good, but it's intense. With Turkish, they often do it on a hot sand bed. So it's like in a copper brewing thing. The coffee is ground into a fine powder, and then you boil it down until it's thick. Like it's almost syrupy when it's done right. There's a place on the Sunset that does it pretty well. I'll find out the name and tell you offline.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
Like espresso, as we said before, became popular 20, 30 years ago. You can go anywhere in the country and get an espresso now that's pretty good, which is nice. Thanks to Starbucks mostly for that. I generally, even if you really, really like espresso beverages, unless you're fairly wealthy and or have a very large kitchen, I generally recommend buying espresso out and brewing coffee at home, because it's really like making a world-class brewed coffee at home is attainable if you practice and learn and take good notes. Making a world-class espresso at home is a $10,000 endeavor that requires a maintenance every 2 months. And
yikes!
Espresso machines are at best finicky and a pain in the ass, and at worst like a maintenance hassle. Like you have to have people come and work on them, and it's a whole thing.
Is there any danger there for something highly pressurized?
Well, I mean, yeah, anytime you have a 9-bar pressure cylinder in your kitchen, it's a ticking time bomb.
Fair.
But also like you have to put so you either have to descale the water, filter the water to remove stuff that makes scaling, like lime scaling inside the boiler before you do it. They cost a lot of money to keep running, so you can have an espresso anytime during the day that you want. Like it's a lot. There's a warm up period for most good espresso machines. It's 30 minutes or an hour long. So you have to think, I want an espresso with lunch, so I got to go turn this on at 10 o'clock in the morning, so it's warmed up and ready to go. What I will say is that cheaper espresso machines are better now than they have been in the past. Breville, especially, is an Australian company. I think Australia, for whatever reason, people don't drink brewed coffee in Australia. It's all espresso. They sell $500 to $1,000 espresso machines that are pretty good now. They still require you to descale them regularly and stuff like that, but they don't require plumbing in, and they aren't as bad to maintain as they used to be.
Could you characterize the drink? I don't know that I've ever had an espresso. Like what sets it apart?
Wow. The espresso is steam. You're pushing steam at high pressure through this finely ground coffee. There's a brew head, and that forces it through. Basically, you shape the grounds into like a little puck that's 2 inches across, maybe a diameter, and then an inch or so thick, or half inch thick, maybe. It's somewhere between Turkish coffee and brewed coffee, so it has a high body. It has a lot of texture when you're drinking, and generally it's a fairly acidic tasting. Like it's very bright. There's a lot of there's a bright flavor, and then if you've had a latte, you've had an espresso drink, because a latte is a shot or two of espresso, maybe 3, depending how big it is, and steamed milk that's poured in on top of it. A cappuccino is a shot of espresso with foamed milk. A macchiato is a little tiny espresso shot with just a dab of milk on top. That's my favorite. But there's a lot of like, if you go to Starbucks and get a fancy drink that's not brewed, that'll be an espresso drink.
I'm just going to say right now, like 99.9% of the coffee I've had in my life was black.
Black like your soul.
Yes, exactly. I had next to no experience with anything other than.
Brad, I'm going to take you to get coffee sometime. We're gonna open a door for your mind.
Honestly, the rationale really is just I don't need the extra calories. It's just, milk and sugar are cool. I love them. They're great, but
fair.
I don't need it.
So if you heard all this and you still want to buy an espresso machine, the Breville ones are the entry point, I think, for real machines. You can get cheaper stuff, but it's usually not very good. If you want milk drinks like lattes or cappuccinos or macchiatos or whatever, then you do want the ability to produce steam and pull shots at the same time, which in the old days meant a double boiler machine. These days, people put a hot plate that makes steam instantly inside the machines in the cheaper machines, and that's entirely acceptable for doing a steamed milk. For brewed coffee, there are so many ways to brew coffee. And I think we should start by talking about flavor clarity and body, because those are they're kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum.
You just mentioned body in relation to espresso.
Yeah. So body is the texture. We should define those. The kind of texture or thickness of coffee. If you have a cup of coffee that feels like you can feel it inside your mouth, it doesn't just feel like liquid. It feels like there's more there.
If you have to chew it.
Yeah. Well, it's not that thick. It's more like I'm trying to think of another example. Often there's difference in whole milk and skim milk, right? Skim milk tastes watery. There's no texture to it. Whole milk, you feel the fat on your tongue. Yeah, there's a sensation that you get. And a high body has a lot of that kind of fatty sensation. You know that it feels like it's more substantial almost.
Maybe
and some people really prefer that.
Maybe like a good rich hot chocolate is another example of something that feels like it's just thick.
Yeah, it's like the difference between hot chocolate and Swiss Miss, right? One is an instant that you pour water in and it's chocolatey water, and the other one makes your mouth feel like it's been bombarded by chocolate. Flavor clarity is typically the ability to. It's not about how much particulate is in the coffee. It's about your ability to discern flavors in the coffee. So typically, high clarity coffee is going to be a lighter roast that's produced with some sort of method that results in filtering out a lot of the fat and maybe the soluble components, because it leaves just the molecular stuff that goes through the filter and has clear flavor. Whereas the high body preparation methods will involve metal filters or something that doesn't actually filter out the fats and the particulate as much.
We may have talked about this with Adam in regard to alcohol, but what is your kind of tasting prowess? Do you feel like you can pick out a lot of individual flavors?
It depends. It varies widely based on what I'm drinking. Like I am hopeless when it comes to wine. I have a pretty good mouth for beer and coffee. I love chocolate. I can go nuts on. Like if you have chocolates that are complicated, I can pull out a bunch of stuff. So, and from talking to people who do that science for, I have a acquaintance who used to work for a big candy manufacturer, and we talked about this, and she said there's an enormous spectrum in what people are able to discern. And some people are better at picking out certain things than others just because of the way their nose, it could be something as simple as how your nose is shaped. Or like whether you smoke or, any number of other things.
Sure.
You, Brad?
No, I am not. This is going to sound ridiculous. I'm good at knowing how something tastes. I mean, I can I mentally can catalog things as tasting certain ways, but I could not in any capacity compartmentalize the different aspects of the flavor and say, oh, it's like doughy with hints of cinnamon and whatever.
Well, so the interesting thing about this whole concept is that when they took a bunch of people off the street at Davis, as part of the alcohol lab there, they have a wine and alcohol production facility there where they do science to support the the agriculture in California. One of the scientists there actually trained people to detect certain flavors by isolating the flavors, building a shared ontology between the tasters. So they would say, okay, this specific flavor that we're tasting right now, this is dark, this is black cherry. This one is vanilla. This one is tannin. This is blah, blah, blah. And like they were able to, in blind, like double blind studies where there was no, like they were able to identify flavors inside wine, like production wines, not special wines, with just people off the street, that was rivaling the accuracy of people who were like classically trained sommeliers and stuff like that. So presumably everyone has this capability inside them. It's just something like anything else you have to practice.
Interesting. I real quick, slight digression. There's a whiskey blog that I read on occasion. I like this guy's reviews, but I'm just going to quote from like literally the most recent review. I just pulled it up. Nose, raisiny with an edge of dry wine, tobacco, dry oak, and a little more nose tickle than you find at 43% ABV. Deeper in the glass, there are some tutti frutti aromas, orange peel, and sandalwood. Like that's just the nose.
Tutti frutti is really specific. Man, I don't know what tutti frutti means.
Like palate, medium-bodied, dry throughout with a moderate tongue burn, coconut butter, only a hint of raisin, dry wood, and a thin veneer of red grape skins. Not red grapes, but red grape skins.
I do not have that kind of a mouth.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Finish turns nutty with almonds and hazelnuts, dry still, and evolves into tobacco leaf and significant bitter barrel tannins. All of the reviews are like this. Like,
so I pick vanilla and chocolates and fruits and like, honestly, one of the most remarkable cups of coffee I ever had was at a coffee convention where a shop, brewer maker had someone from a shop in Central Oregon near Bend that was brewing coffee, and it was like she had dialed it into the point that like it was just like it like literally it tasted like you'd put blueberry juice in the coffee. Wow. And it sounds revolting, but it was absolutely delicious, and I still think about it. Anyway, yes. So like this range of body to clarity is generally the more body you have, the less clarity you have, the more clarity you have, the less body you have. And most of the interesting brew methods, at least the ones that I like as a person who grew up drinking, fresh ground coffee out of a Mr. Coffee basket drip filter, are in the middle of that range, middle on the kind of clarity end of that range. And drip machines, just to be clear, entirely legit way to make coffee. Like, especially like you can get, okay, I probably wouldn't recommend the Mr. Coffee at this point, but you can get for $100 or $150, $200 a really nice drip brewer that will make coffee that rivals what you can make with it'll definitely be better than somebody who's bad at doing a manual pour, and that will rival a pretty good manual pour these days.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the major brands have had kind of a glow up in recent years with their drip coffee makers. Like there is a whole kind of new mid-range, I would say, because you can buy like a $600 drip maker if you want, but like everybody, like the Mr. Coffees, the Oxos, the whoever's, have got nicer ones than they used to.
Well, so the thing that matters on a drip machine is that the temperature is predictable and is in the right range. The thing you lose with the drip machine is the ability to dial in that temperature generally. Sure. There's some higher end machines that can. Part of the problem with the coffee space is that often when you get above a certain point, you're paying for industrial design rather than actual better tasting coffee. So like a Technivore Mocha Master or Bonavita has a high end competitor to that. Those are kind of the gold standards in the coffee scene. I think Wirecutter has different recommendations these days, but I'm less enamored with Wirecutter's coffee people these days than I once was.
Does the kind of pattern of is the shower the right term? Like the water distribution pattern, does that matter too? Like we've got a Bonavita, but it was like a lower end, like $150 to $200.
Yeah, that's the one that used to be the Wirecutter recommendation, as I recall.
Yeah, I think that's probably why we got it. But I think it like they kind of touted that it uses some kind of shower head pattern.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways. Some people make brewers that mimic a pour over, like that have a swirling drip, like a swirling head that just runs a stream over the center of the bed. The shower, the thing you want is even distribution, and you want the temperature to hit the beans at the right temperature, which for brewed coffee is usually around 205 degrees, right? Depending on your method, it'll be higher or lower based on the grind size. But if you have it too hot, it'll over extract. If you have it too cold, it'll under extract, and that results in really bitter or really sour coffee, respectively. I think I often get that wrong. But so I'm looking at Wirecutter's coffee maker roundup right now, their most recent one. I think that the last time I looked, they were on an OXO. Yeah. So they recommend the OXO 9-cup coffee maker. I don't have any experience with that one, but it's $230. And at that price, I would buy I would probably just buy a Techniform, because they're $250, and like it's an incredible machine for $250. The more manual methods of making coffee, these are generally for single serves, although there are some for multiple servings down here. You control all the aspects. So with the drip coffee maker, you control the amount of water, you control the coarseness of the grind, you control the filter you use, which does make a difference, but you don't usually have control over the water temperature or the amount of the linger time in the basket and stuff like that. Some of the higher end machines, you can dial that in, but generally I find it better to just do a manual rather than to pay for the really expensive machine and then have a bunch of fiddly settings you have to fool with every single time. Just do it yourself. For the manual pour, you want it the scale, which we've already talked about. You want a good grinder. You need a mechanism to hold a filter, which is like a Hario V60 if you like a conical filter. A Kalia Wave is the basket version of that. These are both Japanese brands that where hand pour overs were, I think, invented or at least popularized. Sorry, Kalita Waves, not Kalia Waves. My autocorrect messed me up there. I use the Kalita at home as for mine. I grew up, like I said, drinking Mr. Coffee. I like the basket filter. I find that with the conical filters, you end up with a little bit of over extracted coffee because all the water runs through the tip, and it's not my favorite. But when you're doing the manual pour, you have a pour over kettle, which is like a long gooseneck kettle, which gives you fine control over the amount of water that goes in at any given moment. And you can get those that are either manual that you put on the stove to heat the water up that usually have a thermometer stuck in the lid, or you can just get one that has a thermostat on the base and you put it down, you hit the button and it heats the water up to that temperature and holds it there until you make your coffee. And like I said, a good one, like I use a Fellow Stag these days, which is I had a Bonavita for years. We reviewed it on Tested back in the day. Eventually 8 years in, it started getting a little rusty around the lid and it was clearly time to replace. But the Stag I've had for 3 or 4 years now. I think it's been fabulous. The thing that you get there is control over temperature and the pour rate. And by virtue of the coarseness of the grind, you get the linger time of the water in the basket, right? That's the key thing. So you want to grind your coffee so that the brew time is about 4.5 - 5 minutes for a single cup. And that is one big pour of like 75 or 100 grams of water to bloom the coffee, which is where you kind of all the gas, all the carbon dioxide and all the gases that are trapped inside the grounds kind of bubble up, and you get a nice bubbling. You get a kind of foam on top of the coffee bed.
Interesting. I didn't realize what was going on in that process. The Bonavita drip that we have, I guess it's probably documented in the manual. I don't know where I got it, but it has kind of a secret mode because all it has is a power switch. Like there's no timer, there's no nothing. It's literally just a switch.
Yeah.
If you hold the switch down for like 5 seconds, it'll like flash 3 times, and then you put it into the like pre-wet mode.
Yeah,
where it kind of does sort of what you're talking about, where it'll like, and you can see the light blinking while it's doing it. Like it'll sort of pre-wet the grounds and let them sit for a minute or two, like you're talking about, before it kind of goes like full hog.
Yeah. So that's the difference. That's one of the difference between the cheap drip machines and an expensive drip machine is you want to give it a minute to outgas that stuff and to settle back down. Otherwise you'll end up with channels through the bed that result in under extracted coffee, basically.
Interesting. Okay. I've seen that in the basket or whatever, when you pull it out of like a cheaper drip thing where the coffee looks like a bomb, like there's a bomb crater in it or something, like it's a weird pattern.
Yeah. And the bomb crater, the hole in the middle is not always a bad thing. Like on a lot of pour over techniques, you want to do that. If you want to get into pour over, James Hoffman's channel on YouTube is really good. There's a bunch of good. I think almost every coffee shop in the country has done a guide on how to do a pour over if they sell pour over, because everybody sells pour over drippers in their shops. The nice thing about the pour over is that once you buy a grinder and a kettle, you can experiment with a lot of different pour over techniques relatively inexpensively, because the drippers are usually like $20, $30 at the outside. So, they're expensive for experimentation until you think about how much money you spent on Starbucks before you started making your coffee at home. You typically use the scale to monitor pours and the amount of coffee that goes in. So you weigh your coffee before you put it in the grinder. You grind just the amount that you need. And then you can put the whole brewing mechanism on top of the scale, tear it, and you can measure how much water you're putting in that way. So 1 gram of water is 1 milliliter of water. 1 gram is equal to 1 milliliter for water. And it gives you a nice way to know that you've hit your 500 milliliter target or whatever for your brew. When it's in the bed, when the water is in the bed, not just when it's hit your container, whatever container it's going into. And you can get different kinds of filters. There's brown, there's bleached, unbleached filters. The reason I do the Kalita is that their basket filters are spectacular. You also want to usually pre-wet your filter before you put coffee in, so that gets kind of a papery taste out of the filter if there's any dust or whatever from the manufacturing process, and then discard the water that runs through there.
You can also use metal filters for this, right?
You can also use metal filters. There's the cone.
Yes, I have a cone.
Yeah, but we have cones too. They work better in a Chemex, which is a little bit different brewer, or they have their own thing as well. The cone is trickier to use, and so the paper filter manual pour over, you get a fairly clear, like it's middle of the road on the clear side, pretty far on the clear side. If you use a metal filter in the same brewer, you're going to get a much bigger body coffee and a little bit less clarity because more fat and more particulate comes through. The cone, whereas with the pour over, you're doing kind of a pattern around the brew to distribute the water evenly. With the cone, you want to pour it pretty much straight down the middle, and that will create a big crater in the middle of your brew bed. Okay, next up, French press. This is a really easy one. You grind your coffee real coarse. You dump it in. You soak it for about 4 minutes in hot water, and then you filter the grounds out with a metal mesh filter and some springs, and you pour that in. There's going to be a bunch of crud in the bottom. Don't drink the whole cup. Leave the stuff in the bottom because it'll mess you up. But it's the highest body you can do short of Turkish, really easily.
I started to ask in what way it would mess you up, but perhaps better left unsaid.
Most people will have to go to the bathroom. Some people are unaffected.
I see.
It's a number 2 situation, Brett.
We'll get there, but French press is what I've been using to attempt cold brew, and even with multiple filtration steps, there's definitely still some crud.
Yeah, with the cold brew, you're storing in a bigger container. Well, we'll talk about cold brew in a minute. But it's basically when you pour a French press, when you're pouring the coffee from the press into your coffee cup, you want to pour carefully. You want to pour slow and steady and keep and it's like playing chicken with your intestines. You gotta decide when to stop, when you've had enough, getting as much coffee as you want without any of the stuff that's going to cause you problems.
I'm not making that the title of this episode, I swear.
No, that's absolutely not the title of this episode. There's a bunch of hybrids that kind of shoot the gap between pour overs and French presses. The AeroPress inverted method uses a paper filter and an immersion combined with a paper filter. So you get a really, really, really nice like mix of clarity and body that's right down the middle. There's a reason for years. The AeroPress is a tube with a plunger on one end and a filter on the other end. And the way that they tell you to make coffee in it is to put the filter on the bottom and then put coffee in the bottom and then pour water in there and push it through. And they call it espresso, which it is not. But if you turn it upside down and set it on the plunger and fill the coffee in there, let it sit for 4 minutes and then force it out through the paper filter, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Now, the problem is because you have to be able to push it through the filter, the AeroPress makes a relatively small amount of coffee at a time. So it's definitely a 1 cup, not a 2 cup method. But it's a like in terms of idiot proof, fast and good, AeroPress is kind of gold standard as far as I'm concerned. There's a thing called the Clever Dripper, which is shaped like a V, like a Hario V60 conical pour over, but it has a stopper mechanism. It's bigger than a Hario. It has a stopper at the bottom, and you basically fill it with you put the coffee in, pour the water, and let it sit in the conical filter for 4 minutes, and then you put it on top of your decanting thing, whether it's a mug or whatever, and that triggers a release on the bottom. Then the coffee runs out. So you get like, again, it's an immersion plus a paper filter, which is good. There's French presses by a company called S-Pro that are hyper. There's multiple layers of screen in them, including some really, really fine, like industrial scientific mesh screens on the lowest scale that filter out almost all of the fines. So you can do a French press that's a little bit more filtered than a traditional one, still has a lot of the body.
That sounds nice. Our French press is a Bodum, I believe. I don't know
that's everybody's French press is a Bodum for the most part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're an enormous. They have the French press market in the U.S. The S-Pro people are based in Canada. I highly recommend them if you like a French press but don't like sediment. They're a little bit expensive. They're a little bit of a pain in the ass to clean, but the coffee is really good. It's what I like when I have people over and I need to make a big batch of coffee. I either do that or a Chemex. Depends on whether it's for breakfast or dinner, honestly, because dinner people tend to put cream and sugar in, and breakfast a lot of people drink black.
I don't know how people handle dinner coffee. I mean, caffeine is a whole topic that we may not even get into here. Maybe we should talk about caffeine in its own episode.
Yeah, caffeine. We should have. I would love to have Phil on to talk about caffeine. Phil Broughton at some point.
Okay,
caffeine.
Yes, he would know.
He's a mad scientist. There's also these new things called bypass brewers. I haven't actually spent a lot of time with these. I need to actually get one of the next level 10s in. This is a tube brewer. It almost seems like a follow on from the AeroPress in that it's a tube brewer with a filter on the bottom and a cutoff that opens, but you can do it's a combination, another combination like filtering / immersion brewer method. People seem to really like these. Fellow makes one. Next Level makes one. I think there's a couple others that I didn't actually write down the names of. We talked about the Chemex, which is kind of like a pour over, but it's a much heavier filter. Like they use it's almost like paper that you would use in a lab. But you fold it over and make a triangle out of squares. Basically, you put it in this big conical shaped urn, I guess. I don't know. It's a vase looking thing. And you can make a really nice, clear cup of coffee with it because the filters are not particularly porous. And you can also do larger batches. They come up to like a liter size. So you can do, if you need to do 6 cups of coffee a day, you can do that with a Chemex pretty easily.
Chemex has always been the weirdest name for this because the output of something called a Chemex seems like the last thing you would want to drink. But anyway,
I love my Chemex. I feel like this is another one of those ones that came out of somebody who had access to laboratory glassware, which is why it's called a Chemex, but I don't know for sure.
Fair.
There's a bunch of other hot brew methods I'm going to hit. Siphon is like a real high showmanship method where you put water, you put 2 giant bowls that are made of heat safe glass and are connected with a straw and an airtight seal between them. And then there's a filter between the top one and the bottom one, and a straw that goes to the bottom of the bottom container. So when you boil water in the bottom container, the steam pushes the water down out of the bottom container, up the straw into the top where the grounds are. You leave the water on the bottom boiling and simmering long enough for the top to brew. It's usually like 2 minutes. And then you cut the heat. And as the steam in the bottom cools off, it creates a vacuum in the bottom and sucks the coffee back down from the top through that filter and through the grounds.
Interesting.
And it is very, very cool and an enormous pain in the ass to clean up and all of the things. Like it's something you do for special occasions because it involves a lot of really hot glassware and pressure and steam and glass on the stovetop or a special burner and all sorts of other crazy stuff. But the coffee is really, really, really like it's delicious. It also comes out insanely hot. So be careful the first time you have siphon coffee. You want to give it a moment, probably. And then we talked about Turkish and a bunch of other stuff. We should talk about cold brew.
Yes, that's kind of the whole reason that I wanted to do this episode is I finally started experimenting with it.
Yeah. So cold brew, there's a huge cold brew market in the US now. I don't know if you realize this, but like the cold brew section in your grocery store has exploded in the last couple of years.
Oh, you mean like you can just buy the raw concentrate?
You can buy just now? Cold brew concentrate. You can buy it unconcentrated as well. And you can buy it mixed with milk. You can buy it mixed with sweet milk. You can buy it you can buy Vietnamese cold brew. You can buy everything. It's really easy to make cold brew, generally speaking. What you need is a big container and something to strain out coffee grounds, and then some coarsely ground coffee and time.
Yeah, like I'm kind of shocked. I put it off for weeks. I kept thinking I wanted to do it, and I was like, there's probably so much to learn. I just, and I finally got around to it, and I was like, oh my God, like you grind the coffee, you dump it in a thing full of water, you let it sit.
For a day. Basically, 12 hours to 24 hours.
That's probably, there are a couple of hard things about it. Like getting the ratios right and figuring those out is actually the hardest part. But the other hard part is, yes, there is a long lead time before you find out how you did.
So the ratios, generally speaking, the ratios are pretty standard across in industry wide. If you, the place, so the Hoffman's, James Hoffman wrote a book years ago that has all of this stuff in it. It's kind of hard to find. There's blog posts about it. Ritual Coffee in San Francisco at ritualcoffee.com has a really good section of brewers guides for pretty much every type of brewer that they've ever sold. And you can use that as a kickoff point for whatever you're trying to make. So they recommend 1 to 10 ratio of grounds to water for cold brew. I usually do a little bit lower than that just because the brewer I use doesn't, like the filter doesn't quite reach the water at the ratio that they want for the amount of coffee that the filter will hold, and have had good results. Cold brew is also tricky because often you dilute it. So you're brewing a concentrate and then you're adding hot water to it to bring it up to the strength that you want. The other problem with cold brew is because it is typically low acid and really pleasant to drink. You can drink coffee that is way more concentrated than you would ever drink hot.
That is the experience that I had this week. Pretty much I think it was literally the first batch I made. I like coffee hot or warm, like on the almost hot side of warm, which, like you said, necessitates if you're getting it out of the fridge, you want to add boiling water to it to try to get it up to that level. So I've been trying to make it as concentrated as I can.
Yeah, like you should do 1/4 to 3/4 probably to get because you want like 160, 170 degrees to drink. You don't want it much hotter than that because it'll burn you, and colder than that it starts tasting bad.
So my experience was you're messing around with the ratio. First of all, you've messed around with the ratio of grounds to water to begin with to brew it. Yeah. And when you actually drink it, you're adding more water again. So there's yet another variable to get right or wrong there. And I was adding more or less water for temperature reasons and all this stuff. The other thing is it's delicious. It's really good. I was shocked. Like the whole reason I'm making cold brew is because acid reflux, trying to cut down on the amount of acid I'm consuming. I drink a lot of coffee, probably too much anyway. I think I drank like 5 cups of coffee that day.
So,
and like got up to the edge of being in a bad place caffeine wise. Because it's so smooth, it's so not acidic. It had like, at least the way I did it, it came out with a lot of body. It was very thick, very velvety. Yeah. Like almost a little chocolatey.
If it is chocolatey and velvety, you need to dilute it a lot more than you are.
Oh, man, but it was so good.
So this is the challenge. I do, like I said, 100 grams of coffee for about 110 grams of coffee for about 1.1 liters of water. And I usually mix that about 2/3, 1/3 with milk, and I drink it cold. I drink it as an iced coffee. And I drink one of those a day.
Fine.
That is a one and done for me.
Fine.
Brad. I don't need to touch caffeine for the rest of the day generally. You can make a cold brew as easily as taking like a big mason jar and some cheesecloth or straining it through a Chemex filter or whatever you want. It's very straightforward. You do want to leave this even the fancy Japanese brewer that I have. You have a little bit of sediment in the bottom always. And that's with a good grinder in the whole 9 yards. You can do, like, there are cafes that do ice drip cold brew, which is where you put a liter of ice, a kilogram of ice in the top of the thing and let it melt over 24 hours and drip through Our friend Phil Broughton, aka the proprietor of Funranium Labs, makes cold brew using his version of a Viennese method that makes highly concentrated cold brew. That is delicious. You should probably try some of that too.
Yes, tested fans will remember that's Black Blood of the Earth, correct?
Yeah. Phil makes Black Blood of the Earth. Sorry, I should have said that. He makes batches using time-honored traditions developed while he was an undergrad, and maybe he had a problem, but also it's very low acid, very easy to drink. The same benefits that Brad was talking about. It's not commercially, like he usually drop ships to regions and then has a distributor there. So he's always looking for mules in new areas, as I understand it.
Interesting. Have you ever consumed it undiluted?
When Phil sent us, was kind enough. So I think I met Phil through Ryan Davis. And Phil sent us some samplers and a liter or two for our when he brought it when he came over to be on Oktobercast one year, which was a 24-hour interview chat stream that we did, that Gary Norman and I did back in the day, and we saw through time.
Okay.
Like we were drinking. He was sending like 100 ml vials, and we would just drink those. Okay. And it was too much caffeine. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, don't do that. It's a bad idea. But it was a
podcast for 24 hours. You need something.
It's not like you're playing games for 20. You have to be engaging for 24 hours. We had to do horrible things to each other. It was awful.
Yeah, I'm excited about cold brew. It's definitely going to take some time to dial in a process, but
yeah. So what I generally recommend is, if you're interested in cold brew and you're not sure if you like it yet, either try buying something from the store. There's a Stumptown cold brew concentrate that they sell in they look like Red Stripe beer bottles. They're little squat ones with a twist on top. Those are good. I think those are concentrated, and it's good for 3 full cups. I can't remember. It's a good place to start if you want to try it. They're generally available. You can also, like I said, start with the mason jar approach, and then if you like that, it's generally easier if you buy something that's designed for it, because it's easier. Like it's easier to clean a reusable paper filter than it is to clean cheesecloths or whatever you're using to do the straining. And also the reason I got the Hario is it's the right size to fit in my fridge door with the milk. So it's like there's an easy place to put it in the fridge, which is really nice. And there are a million other ways to make coffee. Like I love hearing about people's crazy ways they make coffee. There's people that make cowboy coffee still, which is where you just dump the grounds in a pot on top of fire and heat them for a while. Then you pour it into a cup through a metal mesh filter. And I assume that there's bathroom consequences to that as well.
I was going to say, then you just chew up the grounds because you're a cowboy.
Yeah, because you're a cowboy. But yeah, it's the general ratio for most pour over and like immersion brewing techniques is about 1:18. See, I do 22 grams of coffee for 320 grams of beans. So you can do the math on that. I don't remember what, 320 grams of water. But it's fun. And like I said, if you practice and take notes and pay attention, you can, like, literally anybody can make a world-class cup of coffee at their house for not a ton of money. So coffee.
It's good.
I like coffee. It turns out
it's quite tasty. I don't know why I run this thought experiment as much as I do. We've talked about both coffee and alcohol on this show, and I think often like that's like the ultimate would you rather to me.
Oh, it's no doubt it's coffee for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always been the answer, but especially like I drink pretty sparingly these days. But I can't tell you. I bet it's been over a decade since I went a day without coffee. I can't imagine it. I just cannot imagine it.
When I had the gallbladder stuff, I kind of cut back a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I drink. I mean, in the summer, I tend to make more ice. In the winter, I make more cold, hot coffee. But yeah, I'm kind of excited about trying these bypass brewers. I've not used them, and I literally, when you said, hey, maybe can we do a coffee episode? I've been doing cold brew. I had just looked at a Coffee Geek review of these bypass brewers and was like, oh man, I didn't know about these. These are cool. I gotta get into this. So maybe we'll do a follow up on a Patreon episode or something at some point.
It's a deep rabbit hole. There's a lot of coffee tech out there.
It is indeed a deep rabbit hole.
Also, a lot of coffee mugs. We don't really need to get into it, but I have a weakness for coffee mugs. We probably have over 30 coffee mugs here for two people.
That's too many mugs, Brad. I thought I had a coffee mug problem.
Yeah, some of them definitely can go. We've just been putting off donating them. But longtime listeners will know that I have talked about the Zojirushi thermal mugs for years. Dave Snyder originally introduced them to me years ago, but it's a Japanese brand that makes I think they make rubber gaskets, but they make rice cookers and a bunch of they started out making rubber gaskets and then bought all the other companies that use those rubber gaskets. The thermal mugs are great. The knock against them is that you can't get your nose in close enough to the coffee to get a good smell out of it. So I actually switched to a Fellow thermal mug, which has a big open mouth. And for when you're in the car and don't want to have sloshing, you can jam a little, it's just a metal screen kind of thing in there that keeps the coffee from sloshing out. Highly recommended. And it was really nice. And then everybody also always asks about Ember mugs, which are those mugs with they have a charger base and a little heating element, a small battery in them that means you can run them away from the hot plate, unlike your typical coffee hot plate. It also is smart and doesn't overheat the coffee or whatever. I got one of those as a gift a few years ago. I use it occasionally too. I think it's neat. My official policy on that is that I don't think the benefit of keeping your coffee warm when thermal mugs, insulated mugs exist outweighs the environmental cost of having devices with built-in batteries that are unnecessary. Yeah, I can agree with that.
But I think they're neat. I too like the Brown Princess Diner mugs that you like. Those are my favorite traditional ceramics. It's
the weirdest situation because the only place you can get them from is Restaurant Supply. So they're like $1 each.
You have to buy 60 of them or something, right?
You have to buy like 2 cases. You have to buy a case of them. So these mugs cost $1 each, but you have to get 36 minimum.
Have you gone to one of the Restaurant Supply places over?
Yes, I've the one near me. The one, okay. No, not that one, but I have been to one near me and they do not have it.
Yeah, we have an inn on the one over by Potrero Hill.
Interesting.
And maybe they can find you something.
Okay, maybe I'll take you up on because the other option is to sneak into your house and steal that Aperture Science mug. Which
I always make sure it's there when you come over, Brad.
I know.
Just watching you.
I saw you. I watched you put it in the dishwasher one time. I was like, "What are you doing? The thing is irreplaceable."
Everything goes in the dishwasher.
One just went on eBay 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm. How much?
Very sad, like $50.
I'm sitting on a $50 mug. I let my kid drink hot chocolate out of that. Holy crap.
It made me sad.
Yeah, I like those. I like those Brown Princess Diner mugs. I like a friend of the show, Fitz. Last time I saw him in Chicago, he's a potter, and he gave me an original Fitz mug, which I drink coffee out of more than anything else these days, I think. So speaking of listeners and friends, we've reached the time where we thank our patrons of the show. As always, Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod is a listener supported show. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you all. So we appreciate you and thank you all patrons. You can find out how to support the show at patreon.com/techpod. Again, it's patreon.com/techpod.
This show is powered by coffee and our patrons.
Yeah, we wouldn't have coffee without the patrons, it turns out. For $5 a month, you get access to the fabulous patron episode every month. You also gain access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, which is full of nerds just like you. I'm sure if you made it this far, you're going to find your people there. We talk about all sorts of cool stuff, and it's a lovely group of people, inclusive, kind, thoughtful, and supportive of hobbies full of information about whatever it is you're doing. I love the time that I spend there. And if you, so we want to thank all of our patrons, but especially our executive producer tier patrons, including Nick Johnston, Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Fiend, Just Wedge 3.0, Joel Krauska, Twinkie and the Argonauts, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer.
Whoa.
Wow, I think our low-key, hey, we're not going to have ads. I think Battle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, may have opened a door for something.
Paved a way.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for supporting the show. We will see you all next week.